The story of early humanity is not only about discovery, tools, or fire. It is, at its deepest level, about survival against a world that was often merciless. During the long winters of the Ice Age, when snow buried the land and winds howled across endless plains, the greatest enemy faced by our ancestors was not always a predator with sharp teeth or rival clans with sharpened spears. It was the cold itself, the invisible force that crept into bones, slowed the heart, and silently took lives during the darkest nights. To understand how cavemen survived, we must step back into this frozen world and feel the environment through their eyes, not as modern humans wrapped in down jackets and heated homes, but as fragile creatures clinging to existence against elements that seem determined to erase them. Imagine standing on a frozen steppe, your breath cloudy into white mist that disappears as quickly as it forms. The ground is hard as stone, covered in snow that squeaks underfoot. There are no warm houses, no roaring furnaces, and no electricity to drive away the darkness. Night is not only a lack of light, it is a presence heavy and suffocating. When the sun sinks, the temperature plunges, and within hours frost begins to form on eyelashes and hair. This was the reality for cavemen. The contrast between the warmth of fire and the lethal chill outside could mean the difference between waking up to a new day or never waking again. In this world, survival was a constant negotiation with nature. Every choice carried weight. Should a clan stay in a cave that offered shelter but little food nearby? Or should they risk venturing across a frozen river in search of game, knowing the cold could weaken them before they arrived? Should precious fuel be burned to keep a fire going all night, or save for cooking tomorrow's meal? The cold forced decisions that were not only practical but psychological, shaping how people thought, bonded, and believed. The cold was not just an enemy outside. It lived inside the human mind as fear. The human body, in its natural state, was poorly suited for this environment. Unlike the woolly mammoth or the reindeer, humans had no thick fur coats, no natural stores of fat to endure long fasting, and no claws or fangs to secure food quickly. Instead, they were vulnerable, easily chilled, and dependent on external resources for warmth. Yet, this weakness was also the root of human strength. The very fact that they were ill-equipped pushed them to imagine, to invent, and to cooperate. In the biting air of the Ice Age, every spark of innovation mattered, and each one grew from the relentless pressure of cold. At the heart of the struggle lay a constant contrast: life versus death, safety versus danger, warmth versus freezing night. For a family huddled inside a cave, listening to the wind tear at the mouth of their shelter, the glow of firelight represented not just heat, but the very boundary of existence. Beyond the flickering orange glow was nothing but darkness, a darkness that could swallow them whole if they dared to step into it unprotected. In this way, fire became symbolic long before it became cultural. It was a line that separated humans from the fate of so many animals that perished in the endless winters. But survival was never guaranteed. Archaeological evidence shows that countless groups failed. Bones discovered in frozen soils tell stories of starvation, of fires that went out, of journeys that ended in silence beneath the snow. Yet alongside these tragedies are traces of triumph. Soot-stained cave walls, bone needles left behind, fragments of her clothing, and tools worn by years of use. These remnants are not just artifacts. They are proof of resilience, echoes of lives that endured despite impossible odds. Each fragment whispers of families who learned to outlast the cold, who adapted to its cruelty and, through adaptation, laid the groundwork for human progress. What makes this story compelling is that it is not about isolated acts of survival, but about endurance across generations. Each winter tested not just the body but the will. Children were taught to stay close to fire, to respect the dangers of frostbite, to memorize the routes to caves or rivers. Elders carried memories of previous harsh seasons, warning of mistakes that could not be repeated. In this way, the cold became not only a physical enemy but a teacher, passing lessons from one generation to the next. The struggle became tradition, and tradition became survival strategy. As we imagine the Ice Age world, it is important to see both its cruelty and its beauty. The frozen landscapes that threatened life were also breathtaking. Glaciers glittering under pale sunlight, herds of mammoths moving across snowy plains, rivers frozen into sheets of glass. To the cavemen, This environment was not only terrifying but awe-inspiring, and this all shaped their myths, their rituals, and their relationship with the world. In their art, paintings on cave walls, carvings of animals, ritual burials, we glimpse how they process a contradiction of a world that gave life through the hunt, yet constantly threatened to take it away through cold. Thus, the introduction to their story is not one of despair, but of resilience. The cavemen faced winters that would crush modern city dwellers within days, yet they endured. They did so not because they were stronger or faster than the beasts around them, but because they were adaptable. Their true strength lay in imagination, cooperation, and the ability to transform fear into innovation. In every frozen night they survived. In every fire they managed to keep alive. They pushed the boundaries of what it meant to be human. This eternal struggle against the cold shaped our species. It forced humans to think ahead, to store food, to master fire, to build shelters, and to craft clothing. It wove social bonds tighter, because no one could survive alone. And it instilled in them a profound respect for the elements, a respect that would be passed down through myth, ritual, and story long after the Ice Age ended. As we move deeper into this exploration, we will step into the cavemen's world section by section. We will look at the landscapes they roamed, the predators they feared, the shelters they built, the tools they shaped, the food they hunted, and the beliefs they held close as they faced the endless winters. Each chapter of their story reveals not only how they survived, but also how the cold, in all its cruelty, forged the very essence of humanity. In the end, the cold was not merely an enemy. It was a sculptor, chiseling away weakness and carving out strength. Without the Ice Age winters, without the endless struggle against frost and snow, humans might never have developed the resilience, intelligence, and cooperation that allowed them to rise above every other species. The eternal struggle against the cold was, in truth, the fire that shaped our destiny. To understand how cavemen survived the coldest nights, we must first immerse ourselves in the world they inhabited. The Ice Age was not one single frozen moment in history, but a series of glacial periods stretching across tens of thousands of years. During these epochs, massive ice sheets advanced and retreated, reshaping continents, carving valleys, and altering ecosystems. The land itself seemed alive, constantly shifting between frozen silence and brief interludes of thaw. For early humans, this was the backdrop of daily life, an environment both unforgiving and abundant, terrifying and beautiful. Picture a horizon dominated by white and gray. Towering glaciers glisten like walls of glass, stretching as far as the eye can see. The air is dry and biting, cutting against skin and lungs with every breath. Plains extend into infinity, broken by scattered stands of hardy pine trees and patches of tundra grass struggling to push through permafrost. Rivers, when not frozen solid, move sluggishly beneath thick crusts of ice, carry with them shards of broken frost that clink and scrape like glass in the current. This was the geography of survival. Raw, harsh, yet filled with possibilities for those who learned its rhythms. Despite its severity, the Ice Age world was not empty. It pulsed with life, though life adapted in strange and often enormous forms. Herds of mammoths, their shaggy coats rippling in the wind, migrated across frozen plains in search of grass hidden beneath the snow. Woolly rhinoceroses plodded heavily across icy ground, their horns sweeping snow aside to expose food. Reindeer, bison, and wild horses thundered in great numbers, providing a living bounty for hunters bold enough to face them. But for every opportunity came a threat. Cave lions lurking in shadows, saber-toothed cats waiting for weakness, and wolves roaming in coordinated packs. To step outside a shelter was to step into a landscape where humans were never the top predator. In this balance of abundance and danger lay the central paradox of the Ice Age world. On the one hand, the land was filled with resources. The carcass of a mammoth could feed an entire clan for weeks, providing not only meat but also fat for fuel, hides for clothing, and bones for tools. On the other hand, to acquire such bounty required extraordinary risk. A misstep in a hunt could mean not only starvation, but also death at the horns of a furious beast or the claws of a stalking predator. The same wide-open plains that allowed hunters to track game also exposed them to freezing winds and sudden storms. The same caves that offered warmth and security also threatened collapse or became lairs for dangerous animals. Glaciers themselves were both barriers and guides. Massive ice walls blocked travel, forcing clans to find narrow passes or risk treacherous detours. Yet these same glaciers shaped rivers and valleys, creating hunting grounds and fertile regions once the ice retreated. Humans learned to read the land as if it were a living map, recognizing patterns of migration, the locations of seasonal shelters, and the routes where animals could be trapped. A successful clan was not one that fought against the land, but one that understood and moved with it. One of the most striking features of the Ice Age world was its unpredictability. Winters were long and severe, but summers, when they came, were short bursts of relief. During these warmer months, flowers bloomed across meadows, herds grew fat, and food became plentiful. Yet this abundance carried its own danger. It tempted groups to remain in one place too long, forgetting the frost always returned. The transition from summer to winter was swift, often catching the unprepared off guard. In this way, the Ice Age punished complacency and rewarded foresight. For humans, survival meant adaptation, and adaptation required both physical and cultural awareness of the environment. Consider the simple act of choosing shelter. A rocky overhang might shield a clan from the wind, but if it faced north, icy gusts could funnel in and make life unbearable. A cave might promise safety, but only if it had a narrow entrance that could be defended from predators. A river provided water and fish, but during thaw it could flood and destroy camps. Every feature of the land had two faces, one that nurtured and one that destroyed. Cavemen had to weigh these choices constantly, learning from mistakes that often cost lives. The Ice Age world also demanded mobility. Resources shifted with the seasons, and so did the people. Archaeological evidence shows that early humans followed reindeer herds across long distances, establishing temporary camps along migration routes. Others lingered near rivers, harvesting fish during thaw and gathering edible plants when they briefly emerged in warmer seasons. Movement was not optional. It was life. Staying too long in one place risked starvation, while constant travel risked exhaustion. Once again, balance became the key. But the environment shaped more than survival techniques. It shaped psychology. Living in a landscape of such extremes instilled both awe and fear. The endless white plains could feel infinite, making humans seem small and insignificant. The groaning sound of glaciers, the eerie silence of snow-covered forests, and the roar of predators in the distance all contributed to a worldview where nature was not just backdrop, but a powerful force to be respected, feared, and even worshipped. It is no accident that much of Ice Age art depicts animals, mammoths, horses, lions, because these creatures dominated the mental as well as the physical landscape of early humans. The Ice Age world forced constant contrasts into daily life. A clan might experience abundance one week, feasting on fresh kill and dancing by the fire, and famine the next, huddled in silence as bellies ached with hunger. A sunny afternoon might give the illusion of safety, only for a sudden snowstorm to trap hunters far from camp. Children might play near a river in thaw, laughing as ice cracked beneath their feet, only to lose what their own to freezing waters. For cavemen, the environment was never static. It was a shifting stage of opportunities and dangers, requiring vigilance at all times. It is within this context that human ingenuity shone brightest. Unlike the animals they hunted, humans could imagine possibilities, plan for seasons ahead, and share knowledge across generations. They learned that the same river that froze solid in winter could become a highway for movement across lands. They discovered that glaciers, though impassable, created valleys where herds gathered, making them perfect hunting grounds. They realized that caves, dark and threatening at first glance, could become sanctuaries once fire was mastered. Every terrifying feature of the land held the potential for survival, if only it was understood. Thus, the Ice Age world was both enemy and ally. It was a testing ground that killed the unprepared and rewarded the clever. It was a place where the line between life and death was as thin as a spark of fire in a blizzard, where every storm, every river, every herd of animals carried within it the possibility of both disaster and salvation. For cavemen, this was not a distant concept. It was the reality of every sunrise and every sunset. The land shaped them, and in return, through patience, ingenuity, and relentless endurance, they learned to shape the land in subtle ways that bent it toward their survival. This world of ice and shadow, of danger and promise, formed the crucible in which humanity's story of resilience was forged. It was a stage upon which the drama of survival unfolded, setting the conditions that would drive every invention, every ritual, and every bond of family and tribe. Without the harsh landscapes of the Ice Age, there would be no story of cavemen. And without that story, we would not understand the roots of our own species' endurance. To understand the magnitude of the struggle, we must look at the human body itself. Strip away the inventions, the furs, the fire, and the tools, and what remains is a surprisingly fragile creature standing exposed against the unforgiving cold of the Ice Age. Compared to the beasts that roamed the frozen plains, humans were ill-equipped for survival in such climates. Their bodies carried no thick pelts of insulating fur, no vast fat reserves like seals or bears, and no natural adaptations to conserve heat for long stretches of time. They were, in the most primal sense, naked in a world of ice. The cold is merciless to flesh. When exposed, skin loses heat rapidly, the body shivers to generate warmth, and blood vessels constrict to preserve core temperature. Fingers and toes, furthest in the heart, stiffen and darken as frostbite begins its silent invasion. If the cold deepens, shivering gives way to confusion, speech slurs, and the mind begins to wander into a false sense of warmth, the cruel trick of hypothermia. For cavemen, these were not medical terms but terrifying realities, as common as the rising of the sun. They knew that the night could take someone quietly, with no warning but a growing stillness, and that once the body surrendered to cold, there was no return. Against such threats, the human body seemed pitifully weak compared to Ice Age animals. The woolly mammoth carried a thick coat of hair, a dense layer of fat, and a body so massive that heat was preserved almost effortlessly. Wolves and cave lions bore fur that shed snow and kept them warm even in blizzards. Bears hibernated, conserving energy through the longest winters. Humans, by contrast, had only bare skin, fragile hair, and a high demand for calories. They could not hibernate. They could not endure exposed. They required constant effort just to keep their internal fire burning. Yet, within this weakness lay the seeds of strength. The very vulnerability of a human body forced early humans to think beyond biology. They compensated for their lack of fur with clothing, fashioned from the hides of the animals they hunted. They replaced fat reserves with clever food storage, drying and smoking meat for lean times. They created tools not from claws or fangs, but from flint and bone, giving them an edge sharper than nature provided. While animals survived by instinct, humans survived by adaptation. And adaptation required imagination. Still, the daily struggle was immense. Consider the caloric demand of staying warm. A human in freezing weather burns far more energy than in temperate climates, and without constant food, weakness sets in quickly. Cavemen needed to hunt not only for nourishment, but also for fuel to feed their internal furnace. Every bite of fat or meat was more than a meal. It was heat, survival compressed into calories. A single mishunt or failed trap could mean shivering nights and the slow drain of strength. Hunger and cold combined into a vicious cycle. Weakness made it harder to hunt, which made food scarcer, which deepened the cold's hold on the body. Children and the elderly were especially vulnerable. Their bodies, less efficient at generating and retaining heat, often became the first victims when food ran out or when firewood grew scarce. Archaeological evidence suggests that entire family groups sometimes perished together, their remains preserved in icy soils as silent reminders of the body's fragility. For the survivors, such losses were not only emotional tragedies but also brutal lessons. The cold would exploit any weakness, and survival required constant vigilance. Even in moments of rest, the body was not safe. Nighttime posed one of the greatest threats, as fires burned low and temperatures plummeted. Without steady fuel, embers dimmed and the bitter air seeped into shelters. Families huddled together, pressing skin against skin, using their own bodies as shields against the darkness. This closeness was not simply affection. It was necessity, a merging of fragile warmth to create a fragile collective defense against freezing death. The psychological toll of the cold was just as real as the physical. The body could only endure so much, but the mind often gave in sooner. Imagine the endless white horizon, the numbness creeping into fingers and toes, the constant hunger gnawing at the stomach. Fear became a companion, whispering that each night might be the last. Yet the human mind, though strained, found ways to resist despair. Fire became a symbol of hope. Clothing became a second skin of triumph. And tools were not just objects but extensions of determination. By creating solutions, cavemen told themselves they could endure that weakness was not destiny but a challenge to overcome. There were, however, limits. Archaeological studies reveal signs of malnutrition, stunted growth in children, and skeletal remains marked by frostbite and disease. These traces remind us that not all battles with the cold were won. Entire clans vanished, erased by winters too harsh to endure. The human body, resilient as it was, often bent beneath the relentless weight of nature. Yet the fact that others survived, that some endured and passed on their knowledge, speaks to a deeper resilience, not of flesh but of will. It is here that contrast defines the story most powerfully. Against the massive mammoth, humans were small. Against the thick-coated bear, they were bare-skinned. Against the ice and snow, they were fragile sparks of warmth. And yet, it was precisely because of this fragility that they innovated in ways no other creature could. They turned hides into clothing, bones into needles, fat into fire. They transformed weakness into ingenuity, necessity into invention. The cold revealed the body's flaws, but also ignited the mind's fire. This duality, weak flesh, strong spirit, became the foundation of human endurance. The Ice Age showed our ancestors that they could not rely on instinct alone. Instinct might keep an animal alive, but for humans, survival required something more: cooperation, memory, foresight, creativity. Each fragile body carried within it a mind capable of imagining warmth even in the heart of the coldest night, and that imagination became the decisive tool in humanity's battle against nature. Thus, when we speak of cavemen facing the cold, we are not only talking about a biological struggle, but a human one. Their bodies were frail, but their spirit, born of necessity, carried them through winters that would have destroyed countless other species. The Ice Age tested the limits of flesh, but in doing so, it forged the resilience of mind and community that define humanity to this day. For cavemen, the cold wind was more than a discomfort. It was a predator of its own, silent and persistent, always probing for weakness. Without protection, even the strongest body would eventually surrender to frost and exhaustion. Shelter, therefore, was not a luxury. It was the first line of defense against a relentless Ice Age winter. Long before architecture as we know it, our ancestors mastered the art of shaping the world into havens of survival, turning stone, wood, and bone into sanctuaries where life could endure against a storm. The most ancient and natural form of shelter was the cave. Across Europe and Asia, caves became the cradles of survival, offering ready-made walls and roofs that shielded families from snow, wind, and predators. Imagine entering a dark cavern after days on the frozen plains. The sudden stillness, the muffled silence, the way the air, though cold, lacked the biting sting of the wind outside. For early humans, this was more than relief. It was safety. The cave's embrace gave them time to rest, to build fire without fear of it being snuffed out by gusts, and to gather as a community in a space that felt closed against the chaos of elements. Yet caves were not always simple gifts. They were often already occupied by bears, lions, or hyenas, forcing dangerous confrontations. Evidence suggests that some clans lost lives trying to claim these sanctuaries, while others retreated and built alternatives in the open. For those who succeeded, however, caves became more than shelter. They became homes imbued with meaning. Walls turned into canvases where animals and hunting scenes were painted, perhaps as rituals to ensure success, perhaps as attempts to bind the human spirit to the spirit of the land. Living in a cave transformed survival into culture, giving a psychological anchor to the harsh winters outside. But not every group lived near caves, and the Ice Age demanded mobility. Hunters could not always stay tethered to a single stone sanctuary. In the treeless tundras or windswept plains, humans had to create shelters from whatever materials they could find. Here, their ingenuity shines. Archaeological discoveries reveal astonishing structures built from mammoth bones, tusks, and hides. These shelters, raised on circular frameworks of massive bones, were draped with thick animal skins to block the cold and insulated with layers of grass, moss, and even snow itself. They were primitive yet sturdy, capable of withstanding winds that would shred ordinary tents. Picture such a structure. The curved arc of tusks forming a dome, mammoth skulls anchoring the frame, hides stretched taut across the surface, smoke seeping from a small vent at the top where a fire burned inside. Around the entrance, piles of bones formed barriers against the wind. Inside, the floor was lined with fur, and families huddled together in relative warmth, protected by the very animals they had hunted. In these shelters, death was transformed into life. The bones of the mammoth not only fed the clan, but also kept them alive in another form, standing between them and the lethal night. Shelters vary depending on region and resources. In forested areas, lean-tos of wood and bark provided cover, while conical huts resembled the distant cousins of later teepees. In snowy regions, humans learned to pile snow into insulating mounds, exploiting its natural ability to trap warmth. These snow shelters were not works of comfort, but they could save lives in emergencies, offering a temporary refuge until better arrangements were possible. Everywhere they traveled, humans carried with them the knowledge that survival meant shaping the land into walls, no matter how fragile or temporary. The act of building shelter was not only about protection, it was also about community. A single person could not easily construct a mammoth bone hut or haul heavy stones into place. Families and clans had to cooperate, combining strength, skill, and time. In this way, shelters became more than physical defenses. They were physical manifestations of unity. Every bone placed, every hide stretched, every fire kindled within was a testament to cooperation. When a group huddled inside, listening to the storm outside, they were not only warm, they were together, bound by the walls they had raised with their own hands. Shelters also carried symbolic weight. They were boundaries between chaos and order, danger and safety. Outside was the unknown, predators, storms, starvation. Inside was warmth, food, and human presence. This contrast was powerful, shaping psychology and myth. Firelight flickering against cave walls created shadows that danced, inspiring stories told to children, passing knowledge and caution through generations. The shelter became a stage upon which culture unfolded, where memory and imagination mixed in equal measure. But the Ice Age was unrelenting, and even shelters had their vulnerabilities. Fires could choke the air inside caves with smoke, if not vented properly. Roofs of hide could tear in storms, exposing families to sudden cold. Snow could collapse fragile huts. Entire communities sometimes perished when shelters failed, their bodies preserved in frozen soils as haunting reminders of how thin the line between life and death truly was. The struggle was constant. Reinforce walls, repair roofs, keep fire burning. Never let the cold reclaim the space carved out as dominion. The contrast between inside and outside defined daily existence. Inside, the warmth of fire, the closeness of family, the smell of cooked meat, the soft furs beneath tired bodies. Outside, the howl of wolves, the sting of frost, the vast emptiness of dark plains. This duality imprinted itself on human minds, teaching them that life was not only about endurance, but also about creating sanctuaries of meaning against the endless void of nature. Shelters also carried forward the first lessons of architecture. Though crude, the methods of arranging bones, hides, and stones planted seeds for future innovation. The understanding of how to anchor a frame, how to distribute weight, how to use available resources. These were the first steps in a long path that would eventually lead to villages, towns, and cities. In this sense, the Ice Age shelter was not only a refuge, but a foundation for civilization itself. In the daily rhythm of survival, the importance of shelter was woven into every choice. When to move, where to camp, how to use bones, hides, stones, or snow to create a barrier against death. Every decision mattered. Archaeological remains show that even temporary shelters were carefully constructed, suggesting that cavemen knew well the risks of neglect. In their world, carelessness was fatal. Attention to shelter was attention to survival. Ultimately, shelters of stone and bone tell us a deeper story, that humanity was never content to accept weakness. Faced with a hostile environment, fragile bodies, and predators stronger than themselves, humans chose to carve out spaces of safety. They transformed cold caves into homes, deathly mammoth bones into protective domes, scraps of wood, and hide into fortresses against the night. In doing so, they declare that even in the face of overwhelming odds, they would not simply endure the Ice Age, they would resist it, shaping its dangers into defenses. The shelters of cavemen were more than walls. They were symbols of defiance, ingenuity, and hope. They stood as a thin yet powerful line between extinction and endurance. And though time has buried many beneath earth and ice, their memory lives on as proof of humanity's first great victory against the most silent and merciless predator of all, the cold. For cavemen, fire was not merely a discovery. It was a revolution, a force so profound that it transformed existence itself. To live through an Ice Age winter without fire was nearly impossible. With fire, humanity claimed a weapon that gave warmth, protection, and meaning. If the shelter was the first defense, then fire was a heart beating within it. Without its glow, caves remained cold tombs of stone. With it, they became homes, filled with light, warmth, and life. Fire stood at the center of survival, a fragile but eternal ally, demanding care yet giving immeasurable strength. The first encounters with fire were likely terrifying. Lightning splitting the sky, igniting trees into blazing infernos, or lava spilling from the earth in glowing rivers of death. Such sights must have inspired awe and fear. Early humans may have approached with hesitation, watching flames consume wood, watching sparks leap like living creatures. Yet curiosity outweighed fear. Gradually, they learned to steal fire, carrying smoldering branches from wild blazes back to their shelters. This act alone was dangerous, but it planted the seed of a relationship that would define humanity forever. Once brought into caves or bone shelters, fire transformed the atmosphere. The flickering glow banished darkness, pushing back the predators that thrived on night. The warmth shielded bodies from frostbite, offering comfort that fur alone could not provide. Around the fire, families gathered close, not only for heat, but for companionship. Firelight made faces visible, allowed stories to be told, allowed songs and chants to rise above the howling wind outside. In this way, fire did more than preserve life. It gave shape to human culture, binding people together in circles of warmth. But fire was not easily controlled. It had to be fed constantly, and fuel was not always abundant. Gathering would require effort, sometimes long journeys through snow to collect fallen branches. In treeless regions, humans turned to dried grasses, bones, or even animal dung, finding fuel wherever possible. Sparks could die in an instant, plunging the shelter back into darkness and cold. To lose fire in winter was to court death, and so clans treated it with reverence, keeping embers alive through the night, protecting them as carefully as they guarded food or weapons. Fire became sacred, not just practical, an immortal flame that represented the difference between survival and extinction. Over time, humans advanced beyond merely keeping fire alive. They learned to create it. Archaeological evidence points to methods, such as striking flint against pyrite or steel-like stones, producing sparks that ignited tinder. Others may have used friction, spinning sticks rapidly to create heat until dry fibers caught flame. These techniques demanded patience, skill, and practice, but once mastered, they freed humans from dependence on wildfires. The ability to summon fire on demand marked a turning point, elevating humanity's control over nature. No longer passive recipients of flame, cavemen became its masters. The uses of fire were endless. It cooked food, making tough meat tender, unlocking nutrients from roots and tubers, and killing harmful parasites. Cooked food not only sustained a body better, but also reduced the energy required for digestion, perhaps fueling the growth of larger brains. Fire hardened wooden spear tips, giving hunters stronger weapons. It allowed hides to be dried and bones to be worked more effectively into tools. Even insects and parasites fled from smoke, giving humans relief from biting pests. Fire was at once a tool, a weapon, and a companion. Its defensive power was equally vital. The glow of flames at a cave's entrance kept wolves, lions, and hyenas at bay. The crackle of burning, which signaled to predators that danger awaited. Fire allowed humans to camp in open landscapes where no natural defenses existed, planting circles of flame that created invisible walls of safety. To predators, humans became not just prey, but strange creatures wielding light and heat, unlike anything else in the frozen wilderness. Perhaps most profoundly, fire reshaped human psychology. Darkness once meant vulnerability, but with fire, night became a time of gathering and imagination. Around the hearth, knowledge was shared. Elders told stories of hunts, ancestors, and spirits. Shadows dancing on cave walls turned into shapes of animals and gods. Children learned through tales, while rituals emerged in the presence of flames. Fire gave rhythm to life. Morning's light, evening's fire, the eternal cycle of brightness against the void. In its glow, humanity learned not only to survive but to dream. The relationship with fire also carried risk. Flames could escape control, burning shelters, consuming food stores, or injuring those who lived too close. Fire was both ally and danger, demanding respect. Myths may have arisen to explain its dual nature, portraying it as a gift from gods or ancestors, one that must be honored and never taken for granted. Such beliefs reinforce careful stewardship, ensuring that fire remained a blessing, not a curse. Archaeological sites provide echoes of these ancient flames. Hearts blackened with soot, circles of stone filled with ash, layers of charred bones. All speak of countless nights when fire kept humans alive. Some hearts appear carefully maintained for generations, suggesting that fire was more than practical. It was ancestral, a continuity linking the living to those who came before. Sitting at a fire was sitting in the presence of history itself. Even in their struggle against the cold, cavemen used fire to manipulate the environment. They burned grasslands to drive herds of animals, creating opportunities for hunts. They smoked hides to preserve them longer. They used fire to clear paths, to mark territories, even to send signals across distances. Each use reflected growing intelligence, turning flame into a versatile tool that expanded the possibilities of survival. The contrast fire created could not be more striking. Outside, the endless cold, the bite of frost, the lurking predators, the black emptiness of winter nights. Inside, the warm circle of light, the smell of roasted meat, the laughter of children, the stories of ancestors. Fire turned existence into dual worlds, the hostile beyond and the human within. In this contrast lay the essence of survival, the transformation of chaos into order, danger into safety, despair into hope. In the end, mastery of fire was not only about learning to spark flame, but about learning to live with it, to nurture it as one nurtures kin. For the cavemen, fire was a fragile miracle, born from patience and guarded with devotion. It gave them more than survival. It gave them identity. They were no longer creatures of the dark, shivering in caves. They were keepers of the flame, beings who bent nature's most dangerous force into a servant of life. The Ice Age was merciless, but with fire, humanity carried a piece of the sun into the frozen world. Each flicker in the darkness was a statement that they would not be broken, that warmth and light would always follow them, even in the coldest of nights. Fire was their eternal ally, and in its glow, the path of human destiny began to burn brighter. In the frozen expanse of the Ice Age, human skin was no match for the elements. Unlike bears or wolves, whose fur grew thick and dense, humans were exposed, vulnerable, and ill-equipped to endure biting winds or nights where the temperature plunged far below freezing. To survive, our ancestors had to create their own skins, an armor not of flesh and fur, but of ingenuity and adaptation. Clothing became humanity's shield against the cold, a second layer of survival crafted from the bodies of the very animals they hunted. The earliest forms of clothing were simple but essential. After a hunt, the hide of a reindeer, bison, or mammoth served not only as food, but also as raw material. Stripped of fat, scraped clean, and softened by chewing or pounding, hides became pliable. Once draped across the body, they held in warmth, turning a naked figure into something closer to the animals it envied for their natural coats. Over time, this practice evolved from mere wrapping into true craftsmanship. Archaeological findings, including awls and bone needles, reveal that humans learned to pierce hides, stitch them together with sinew, and shape garments that fit the body more securely. Imagine the transformation. A hunter returning from the kill, not only with meat to feed the clan, but also with fur that would later wrap his children as they slept. The bison that once thundered across the plains would become both nourishment and warmth. Its hide stretched into cloaks, boots, and bedding. Nothing was wasted. Bones became needles, tendons became thread, and furs became protection that made the difference between life and death. In this way, every hunt was doubled. Each animal was both food and clothing, sustaining humans inside and out. Clothing also carried a social and symbolic weight. Not all hides were equal. A mammoth hide, heavy and durable, provided unmatched insulation but required skill to shape and manage. Reindeer skins, softer and lighter, were ideal for layering and for making boots or leggings. Some groups may have reserved certain furs for particular roles within the clan. The elder draped in wolf pelts, the hunter clothed in bear skin as a sign of strength, the children bundled in softer rabbit hides. Clothing became a marker of identity and perhaps even status, linking survival to the stories humans told about themselves. The process of preparing hides was itself a form of labor and ritual. Women and men alike worked the skins, softening them with fat or brain matter, stretching them over wooden frames, and smoking them above fires to increase durability. These processes required patience, skill, and memory, passed down through generations. Each garment carried not only warmth but the knowledge of countless hands before, weaving survival into tradition. In colder regions, layers became essential. Inner garments of soft furs pressed against the skin, while outer layers of thicker hides blocked wind and snow. Boots were stuffed with grasses for insulation, while hoods shielded faces from frostbite. Archaeological evidence suggests that by the later Ice Age, humans had developed sophisticated clothing systems rivaling those of modern cold-climate peoples, such as the Inuit. This mastery of clothing allowed them to push further into the harshest regions of the globe, places where unprotected flesh would freeze in minutes. The contrast between clothed and unclothed was dramatic. To step outside without protection meant almost certain death, as frost crept into fingers and toes, stiffened joints, and dulled the senses until collapse was inevitable. To step outside wrapped in hides, however, was to walk as though armored in warmth, the fur turning aside by the wind, the leather shielding the skin from snow. In clothing, humans became more than fragile creatures of plains. They became resilient survivors, equipped to face nature on its own terms. But clothing was not only functional. It became decorated, adorned with beads of bone, shells, or carved ivory. Some garments bore marks or patterns, perhaps symbolic of clans, roles, or beliefs. In these moments, clothing crossed from survival into culture, becoming an expression of identity. What began as armor against the cold became also a canvas for meaning, a way to transform necessity into artistry. Just as firelight gave rise to stories, so too did clothing give rise to symbols, carry within its stitches both warmth and memory. The labor of clothing also reinforced bonds within the clan. While hunters risked their lives to bring down animals, those who remained behind transformed those kills into wearable lifelines. Each garment stitch was an act of love, an act of preservation. Parents wrapped their children in furs with the same care that others guarded embers of fire. Survival was not the achievement of individuals alone, but the group as a whole, bound together by shared work, shared hides, shared warmth. The dangers of inadequate clothing were ever present. Frostbite, hypothermia, and exposure haunted every misstep. If a garment tore during a hunt, if boots grew wet and failed to dry, if a storm caught a clan unprepared, lives could be lost. The Ice Age did not forgive carelessness. Every stitch, every layer, every preparation was an act of vigilance. Clothing was not decoration alone. It was life itself, woven from sinew and hide, tested each day against the merciless sky. Clothing also expanded human reach. Properly equipped, humans could cross frozen rivers, hunt in open tundra, and migrate into colder lands. Furs became passports to new territories, insulating bodies against climates that would have been impassable otherwise. In this sense, clothing was not merely survival, but expansion, the key that unlocked the possibility of human migration, of spreading across continents during the Ice Age. At the heart of it all was contrast, the fragility of naked skin against the ferocity of winter, the transformation of that fragility into resilience through crafted garments. Clothing turned weakness into strength, helplessness into adaptation. With every pelt sewn, every hide softened, every boot lined with grass, humans declared their refusal to be driven back by the cold. They could not grow fur, so they made their own. They could not outlast the wind, so they clothed themselves in armor of their own invention. In the firelit shelters of stone and bone, children slept beneath hides, mothers worked needles of bone, and hunters returned with new skins to be fashioned into garments. These were not small acts but the very fabric of survival, as critical as fire or shelter. In clothing, cavemen found both protection and identity, turning the gift of the hunt into a legacy of resilience. Thus, clothing was more than a shield. It was the armor of survival, the bridge between human fragility and the merciless winter. It wrapped humanity not only in warmth but in hope, in memory, in meaning. And with each stitch, each pelt, each layer against the frost, humans took another step away from extinction and another step toward becoming masters of their frozen world. In the frozen theaters of the Ice Age, survival was a game played on the edge of extinction, and its rules were written in blood. For cavemen, food was never guaranteed. To fill their shelters with warmth and nourishment, they had to challenge the titans of their age, mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, bison, and herds of reindeer. Hunting was no small affair. It was a perilous gamble where failure meant hunger and death, while success meant feasts of meat, hides for clothing, bones for tools, and sinew for thread. Every hunt was a battle between fragile human bodies and beasts that dwarfed them in strength, speed, and size. The mammoth was a crown jewel of Ice Age hunting, towering over the tundra with curved tusks and thick fur. To bring one down required not just bravery but strategy. No single hunter could fell such a creature alone. Groups worked in unison, driving herds toward pits dug into the earth or cliffs where the terrain became a weapon. Spears hardened by fire pierced thick hides, arrows rained down in volleys, and persistence wore the animal into exhaustion. The kill was never guaranteed, and hunters often risked their lives under trampling feet or tusk strikes that could shatter bones in an instant. Yet the reward was enormous. Meat that could last weeks, hides that became tents and cloaks, and bones that could be shaped into shelters. Other prey demanded different strategies. Reindeer, swift and agile, were pursued across open plains. Here, endurance became the weapon. Humans, though slower in bursts, could track and chase animals for hours, even days, driving them into fatigue. This technique, known as persistence hunting, turned the weakness of the human body into a strength. While wolves relied on speed and ambush, humans relied on relentless pursuit, guided by observation of tracks, droppings, and subtle shifts in the land. The hunter's mind, as much as the spear in his hand, became the decisive tool. Hunting was never without contrast. The hunter was always close to becoming the hunted. Packs of wolves lingered on the edges of hunts, ready to steal scraps or attack weakened humans. Cave lions prowled the same herds, seeing in humans not competitors, but prey. Even within success, danger lurked. A mammoth brought down might attract predators from miles away, turning a feast into a desperate defense. In these moments, the fire-hardened spears that claimed the beast now served to ward off other predators, making the hunt a struggle not only against the quarry, but against every hungry mouth in the frozen land. The preparation for hunts was as critical as the act itself. Spears were crafted with sharpened stone tips bound by sinew, some tipped with flint blades capable of cutting through hide. Bows and arrows, appearing later, revolutionized distance hunting, allowing hunters to strike from afar. Traps and pitfalls demanded foresight and teamwork, sometimes taking days to build. These tools and techniques reflected not only survival, but the growing intelligence of humankind. Each innovation tipped the balance slightly in favor of the fragile human form against the giants of the Ice Age. But the hunt was not only about physical survival, it was about social survival as well. Within clans, the distribution of meat reinforced bonds. A successful kill fed the group, strengthening alliances and ensuring the hunter's status within the community. To fail repeatedly risked not just hunger but shame, weakening the cohesion of the group. Rituals often surrounded the hunt, with chants or gestures performed before departure, perhaps calling upon spirits for strength. Success was celebrated, not just as nourishment, but as proof of the clan's unity, courage, and endurance. The consequences of failure were stark. A missed throw, a broken spear, or a sudden storm could scatter a hunt, leaving the clan hungry. Hunger bred desperation, and desperation drove risks. Smaller prey, such as hares or birds, offered some relief but never enough for large groups. Winter sharpened this struggle, as herds migrated and game grew scarce. Families sometimes starved, bones becoming thin and bodies weak. Every hunt was therefore charged with tension, the way of survival pressing down on every step, every throw, every decision. And yet, there was a rhythm to hunting that went beyond necessity. Tracking prey required patience, reading signs written in snow and mud, the broken twig, the faint hoofprint, the distant call of animals. Hunters learned to move silently, to think like their prey, to predict movement and behavior. In doing so, they connected deeply with the landscape, their senses sharpened to the subtlest detail. Hunting was as much about knowledge and respect as it was about violence. The animal provided life, but only if the hunter understood its patterns and respected its power. The contrast between feast and famine framed every hunt. When a mammoth fell, bellies swelled, fires crackled, and laughter echoed in caves. Children ate marrow from bones, women cured hides, and men recounted the chase. Yet weeks later, the bones might lie scattered and picked clean, hunger gnawing once more at the clan, and the cycle of risk and struggle began anew. In this rhythm, humanity learned resilience, not comfort but endurance, not abundance but persistence. There is also evidence that humans honored the animals they hunted. Skulls arranged in patterns, bones carefully placed, and carvings on ivory suggest a belief that the spirit of the prey lingered. Perhaps they feared angering the animal's spirit. Perhaps they wished to ensure future hunts. Whatever the reason, this reverence reveals that hunting was not seen as simple slaughter, but as a sacred exchange, life taken for life given. The animal's body fed the clan, and in return, its spirit was remembered, honored, or appeased. Hunting the giants also shaped the very structure of human society. Cooperation was not optional. No one could stand against a mammoth alone. Each hunt demanded roles: scouts, drivers, throwers, finishers. Success depended on communication, timing, and trust. In this way, hunting trained clans to function as unified groups, planting the seeds of leadership, shared responsibility, and even early social hierarchies. To hunt was to build not just survival, but society itself. Ultimately, hunting in the Ice Age was a paradox. It was brutal and dangerous, filled with fear, exhaustion, and blood. Yet it was also empowering, binding, and deeply meaningful. Through the hunt, fragile humans stood against the mightiest creatures of their age and claimed victory not through brute force, but through intelligence, cooperation, and resilience. In every spear cast, every pitfall dug, every beast felled, humanity edged closer to mastery of its frozen world. The giants of the Ice Age are gone, their bones buried in permafrost, their images painted on cave walls. But their legacy endures in the human spirit. They taught our ancestors courage, patience, and ingenuity. They forced them to adapt, to innovate, to depend on one another. In the endless struggle between hunger and feast, death and life, humans forged their identity as hunters, creatures who, despite weakness, could bring down giants. While hunting the giants of the Ice Age brought triumph and abundance, it was never enough on its own. The rhythm of survival demanded balance. For meat could spoil, herds could vanish, and hunger could return with ruthless speed. In these moments, gathering became the quiet but essential companion to hunting. Cavemen learned to see the land not only as a battlefield of prey and predators, but also as a pantry hidden beneath snow, soil, and stone. Gathering plants, roots, nuts, and berries provided not just variety but insurance, a steady background of food when hunts failed. It was a softer but equally vital thread in the tapestry of survival. The Ice Age world may seem barren at first glance, a frozen expanse where little could grow. Yet beneath the snow and in sheltered valleys, life persisted. Roots and tubers, though tough and fibrous, offered calories and could be dug up with wooden sticks or stone tools. Nuts and seeds, when collected in quantity, could be stored for months, their shells protecting precious energy within. Berries and fruits, when found in warmer seasons, were consumed fresh but also dried near fires to preserve them. Even grasses, mushrooms, and edible leaves had their place in the human diet, though identifying the safe from the poisonous required careful knowledge passed down through generations. Imagine a small group returning from a day of gathering. In their hands are woven baskets or skins filled with cracked nuts, tubers dusted with earth, and bundles of herbs. Children help in this task, their eyes trained by parents to recognize the subtle differences between what can be eaten and what must be avoided. Around the fire that night, the meat of a recent hunt is stretched further with roasted roots and wild herbs, turning a meal into sustenance that lasts longer. Without these small additions, hunger might creep in sooner. With them, survival feels more assured. Storing food was as important as gathering it. Cavemen learned that abundance meant little if it could not last through the lean months of winter. Meat was dried, smoked, or frozen in natural ice pits. Roots and nuts were kept in pits dug into the earth, lined with stones or hides to protect them from moisture and pests. Some groups may have even cached supplies in hidden places, burying them beneath snowdrifts or marking them with stones, returning weeks later when the need arose. These strategies reveal a forward-looking mind, the ability not just to live for the moment, but to plan for the future. The act of storing also carried a sense of security. Knowing that a pit of dried meat or a basket of nuts waited beneath the snow gave the clan confidence to face storms and migrations. It was the difference between desperation and patience. In this way, storage was not just practical but psychological. It quieted fear, allowed for planning, and gave humans a measure of control over an unpredictable world. Gathering also provided essential nutrients that meat alone could not supply. Berries, though seasonal, brought vitamins that protected against illness. Herbs and plants were not only food but medicine, soothing fevers, easing stomachs, or helping wounds heal. Knowledge of plants became as valuable as knowledge of spears, and a clan member who could distinguish healing herbs from harmful weeds became a guardian of health. In this sense, gathering was not secondary to hunting, but complementary, weaving strength into both body and spirit. There was contrast here, too, between abundance and scarcity, between the patience of gathering and the thrill of hunting. Hunting brought sudden feasts, the exhilaration of conquest, and the risk of failure. Gathering brought steady, quiet labor, the certainty of small returns, and the reassurance of continuity. One without the other left the clan vulnerable. Together, they balanced the scales of survival, ensuring that the fires of winter never burned without food nearby. The labor of gathering often fell to women, children, and elders, though not exclusively. This division of effort allowed the group to function as a unit, hunters seeking great rewards while gatherers secured daily needs. The interdependence of these roles strengthened bonds within the clan. Every contribution, whether a mammoth or a handful of berries, mattered. Each bite of food carried the imprint of shared effort, the invisible threads of community woven into every meal. Preservation methods grew more sophisticated over time. Smoking meat over slow fires infused it with chemicals that deterred rot. Fat could be rendered into tallow, stored in animal skins, and later burned as fuel or consumed for energy. Bones rich with marrow were cracked open and boiled, creating broths that stretched resources further. These innovations were small victories against the ever-present hunger, each one proof that humans were learning not only to live but to master the cycles of scarcity. Yet even the best stores could fail. Spoilage, raids by animals, or sudden shortages forced clans into desperate searches. Stories must have been told of winters when supplies ran out too soon, when families starved despite their preparations. These tragedies reinforced the lesson that vigilance never ended. Every season of plenty had to be seen as preparation for the season of want. To ignore this truth was to invite death. Gathering also influenced migration patterns. Humans followed not only herds, but also the cycles of plants. Rivers that offered fish, valleys rich in berries, or plains dotted with nut-bearing trees became destinations as important as hunting grounds. The land itself was mapped not only by paths of animals, but by the hidden treasures of its vegetation. In this way, nature's pantry guided human movement, drawing them across landscapes and shaping the very route to survival. Ultimately, gathering and storing food were not lesser arts beside hunting, but equal partners. Where the hunt gave bursts of triumph, gathering gave quiet endurance. Where spears brought down giants, roots and nuts sustained the weak. Together, they formed the balance of survival, the dual pillars upon which Ice Age life rested. In every bite of roasted tuber, in every handful of dried berries, in every pit of frozen meat beneath the snow, there was a declaration: humanity would not yield. They would bend nature's rhythms to their will, finding nourishment in places others overlooked, stretching the bounty of summer into the depths of winter. In this quiet labor, just as in the thunder of the hunt, humans proved themselves not only survivors but strategists, shaping their destiny one root, one nut, one fire-dried strip of meat at a time. Survival in the Ice Age was not only a contest against nature, it was also a test of human unity. Alone, a caveman could rarely endure the cold, hunt successfully, or defend against predators. Together, however, a clan could share warmth, food, and protection, turning a fragile existence into a community of resilience. Family life was a silent force behind every fire, every hunt, and every shelter. It bound people to one another in a web of duty, care, and belonging, giving survival not just a strategy but a meaning. At the center of this bond stood the family. Parents, children, and elders formed the foundation of the clan, each playing a role in the daily rhythm of life. Mothers nurtured not only their own children but often others as well, for in such harsh times, every child was a child of the group. Fathers hunted, protected, and crafted tools, but they were not distant figures. They too played roles in guiding, teaching, and watching over the young. Elders, though often weaker in body, carried the wisdom of survival, the memory of where the herds had once roamed, which plants healed wounds, or when storms were most likely to strike. In this way, knowledge became inheritance, passed not through writing but through spoken word and example. Around the fire, these bonds came alive. The flames were not only a source of heat but a circle of connection, where stories were told, songs hummed, and plans made. Children listened wide-eyed as elders described hunts of the past or spirits of the world beyond. Laughter, though rare in the struggle of survival, still found its way into these gatherings. A joke, a playful exchange, or the simple joy of warmth after a bitter day, all reminded the clan that they were more than survivors. They were humans, capable of love, humor, and shared memory. Life was harsh, and death was never far away. Illness, accidents, or failed hunts could strike any family at any time. Yet it was precisely in these moments that the bonds of clan life revealed their strength. When one member faltered, others stepped in. A mother who lost her strength could still see her child fed by another woman. A hunter injured in pursuit of prey could be tended by the group until he recovered. Grief, though heavy, was carried not by one person, but by all. The clan absorbed the pain, transforming it into unity, as if to say that while nature could take lives, it could not break the chain that tied them together. Roles within the clan were not rigid but flexible, shaped by necessity. Children, for instance, were not passive observers. From an early age, they learned by doing, gathering small plants, helping scrape hides, or practicing with miniature tools. Every task was preparation for adulthood, and every mistake was a lesson in survival. As they grew, they took on greater responsibilities, gradually stepping into the roles of hunters, gatherers, or caregivers. This natural apprenticeship ensured that knowledge was never lost, that each new generation was equipped to face the same struggles. Elders held a place of honor, not simply tolerated but revered. Their memories were archives of survival, their advice a compass through uncertainty. In a world without maps or books, the mind of an elder was as valuable as the sharpest spear. Around them, respect grew not from wealth or possession, but from endurance. The fact that they had lived through many winters, many hunts, and still carried their wisdom forward. Their stories, repeated over fires and in shelters, stitched together past and present, reminding the young that they were part of a longer chain of humanity. Social bonds extended beyond bloodlines. Clans sometimes merged, forming larger groups for hunts, celebrations, or defense. These gatherings brought opportunities for trade, new partnerships, and shared rituals. They also brought the exchange of ideas, new ways to make tools, new techniques for hunting, or new songs to carry the spirit through the cold. Marriage or pair bonding between clans created bridges of kinship, widening the circle of survival. In this way, family was not only those of one's blood, but also those chosen through trust, cooperation, and shared struggle. Within family life, contrasts were constant. There was tenderness in the way a mother held her infant close to the fire, but there was also harsh discipline in teaching children the dangers of wandering too far. There was joy in a successful hunt that filled the bellies of many, but there was grief in returning with nothing and watching loved ones weaken. Love and loss walked hand in hand, as inseparable as fire and smoke. It was an emotional depth, the mixture of fear and comfort, of vulnerability and protection, that made family bonds the true foundation of human endurance. The fire, once again, played a symbolic role. It was the center of family life, the circle around which humans gathered not just to warm themselves, but to reaffirm their connection. Firelight revealed faces, gestures, and emotions, giving life to community in a way that cold darkness never could. To step into the circle of fire was to step into belonging. To lose that place, to be exiled or left behind, was one of the greatest fears of prehistoric life, for it meant not only loneliness but almost certain death. Family also gave humans their first lessons in cooperation. A child who saw adults share food learned that survival was not only an individual act, but a collective one. A young hunter who watched elders divide the meat understood that fairness and balance kept the clan strong. These lessons, repeated daily, became the foundation of human societies yet to come. In the bonds of Ice Age families, one can glimpse the first threads of culture, morality, and social order, the early roots of civilization itself. And so, family life was more than background to the struggle against the cold. It was the glue that held survival together, the unseen but vital element that gave endurance its shape. Spears, shelters, and fire could only carry humans so far. Without love, cooperation, and shared responsibility, these tools would crumble into futility. It was a heartbeat of family, the rhythm of clan life, that carried humanity through the darkest nights and the fiercest winters. In the end, the story of survival is not only about what cavemen built or hunted, but also about whom they held close. In the embrace of a parent, the wisdom of an elder, or the laughter of a child by the fire, the Ice Age became bearable. Family gave meaning to struggle, and in that meaning, humanity found not just survival, but hope. Beyond the spears, fires, and shelters of Ice Age life, there was another realm that shaped human survival, the unseen world of beliefs, rituals, and spirits. To the caveman, the physical world was filled with mystery, danger, and uncertainty. In the face of such vast unknowns, they sought meaning beyond what their hands could touch or their eyes could see. Belief was a survival tool of its own, offering comfort in loss, courage in danger, and unity in rituals. It was in these early stirrings of spirituality that humans first wove stories to explain their place in a universe that often felt both hostile and awe-inspiring. Every sunrise, every storm, every death carried a weight that demanded explanation. When the wind howled through valleys like the voices of unseen beings, or when lightning split the sky in blinding flashes, it was natural for the human mind to imagine forces beyond itself. Spirits of animals, of ancestors, of the sun and moon, all became part of the caveman's mental landscape. This spiritual imagination softened fear with meaning. Death was no longer a senseless void, but a journey. A hunt was no longer mere survival, but a sacred exchange, where life was taken with reverence, so that life could continue. Rituals arose from this worldview, shaping daily life in ways both subtle and profound. Before a hunt, a clan might gather around the fire, murmuring chants or leaving offerings to the spirit of the animal they sought. A carved bone, a painted rock, or a whispered prayer was more than symbolism. It was a way of asking for luck, of believing that the world itself listened. These small acts gave hunters courage, binding them not only to each other, but also to forces they believed existed beyond the visible world. Caves, with their echoing darkness and hidden chambers, became sacred spaces. Deep inside, away from light, early humans painted animals on walls, bison, mammoths, deer, etched in ochre, charcoal, and clay. These paintings were not decoration. They were acts of devotion, attempts to capture the spirit of the animal, perhaps to ensure success in a hunt or to honor the life taken. Standing before such art, one can almost feel the presence of ritual. Torches flickering, voices chanting, shadows dancing against the painted walls. In those moments, caves became temples and art became prayer. Death itself demanded ritual. To lose a member of the clan was to confront fear directly, for death was both inevitable and mysterious. Graves from the Ice Age show that humans did not simply abandon their dead. They buried them with care, sometimes with tools, weapons, or ornaments, as if sending them on a journey. Bodies were sprinkled with red ochre, a pigment that may have symbolized blood, life, or rebirth. These burials reveal not only grief but hope, the belief that the person continued on in another form, somewhere beyond the reach of winter's cold. Rituals also created unity. A chant before a hunt, a dance around the fire, or a shared mourning for the dead bound the clan together. These acts were not only spiritual but social, weaving individuals into a collective whole. By repeating rituals, humans reinforced trust, belonging, and identity. When the fire burned low and the cold pressed close, these shared moments gave strength to endure. Belief became a kind of invisible shelter, one that no storm could tear down. The natural world was alive with symbols and signs. Animals were not merely prey. They were spiritual partners. To hunt a mammoth was to enter into a sacred relationship, one that demanded respect and ritual acknowledgement. The sun, rising each day, was seen as a powerful force of renewal. The moon, with its cycles, guided time, fertility, and the rhythms of life. Even the stars may have been read as patterns of meaning, guiding travel and inspiring stories told to children beneath the night sky. These beliefs were not uniform but varied among clans and regions, shaped by landscapes, animals, and experiences. A clan near the sea may have revered fish or seals, while one in the forest turned to bears or deer as symbols of strength. Yet across all, the impulse was the same: to give shape to the unknown, to weave meaning into the chaos, and to face mortality with a sense of continuity. Ritual also provided psychological survival. In a world where failure could mean starvation, belief offered courage. A hunter who believed he carried the blessing of the spirits walked with more confidence. A mother who prayed to unseen powers for her child felt a measure of comfort. Even if the rituals did not change the outcome, they changed the heart. And in doing so, they gave humanity a hidden strength. Contrast defined this world of belief. There was fear, the fear of death, storms, illness, and hunger. Yet there was also comfort, the sense that unseen allies walked beside the clan, that the dead were not lost or transformed, that every act of survival carried deeper meaning. In this way, spirituality mirrored survival itself, fragile yet enduring, uncertain yet powerful. As generations passed, these beliefs grew into traditions, carried forward in stories, chants, and art. They were not fixed but evolving, shaped by each clan's experience. In them lay the seeds of religion, culture, and philosophy yet to come. What began as whispers in the dark would one day shape temples, scriptures, and civilizations. But in the Ice Age, these first steps were enough. They gave humanity a sense of belonging not only to a clan, but to the cosmos itself. Beliefs, rituals, and the spirit world were not luxuries. They were as essential as fire and shelter, giving warmth to the mind as much as to the body. In the dark winters of prehistory, when hunger gnawed and cold pressed close, it was often the invisible comforts of ritual that gave strength to keep moving, to keep fighting, to keep living. Spirituality became humanity's quiet rebellion against despair, a declaration that survival was not only about living but about meaning. In the end, cavemen lived in two worlds: the harsh, physical struggle of ice and stone, and the vast, invisible world of spirit and story. It was in the balance of both that they endured, proving that survival is not only about the body, but also about the soul. If there was one discovery that transformed the destiny of humankind more than any other, it was fire. In the endless winters of the Ice Age, when nights stretched long and temperatures fell so low that the air itself seemed sharp enough to cut, fire became not only a source of warmth, but the very heartbeat of survival. Around its flames, cavemen found safety, nourishment, light, and even meaning. To master fire was to bend the raw force of nature into an ally, and in that alliance, humanity stepped into a future no other creature could share. Fire was warmth before anything else. Without it, the cold was merciless, stealing strength from the body, numbing fingers, slowing breath until life itself slipped away. But with fire, caves became habitable, shelters turned into sanctuaries, and even the harshest storms could be endured. Flames licked away the fear of freezing, wrapping humans in a circle of comfort. In those moments, fire was not only heat, it was hope. Cooking was another gift of fire, a discovery that reshaped the human body as well as the human mind. Raw meat, Tough roots and fibrous plants became softer, easier to chew, and more digestible when exposed to flames. Fire released hidden calories, made dangerous food safe, and reduced the burden on teeth and stomachs. Over generations, these changes gave humans an advantage unmatched in the animal world. A strip of roasted mammoth fat, or a pot of boiling bone broth, meant the difference between frailty and strength. Around fire, not only meals but entire bodies and brains were nourished. But fire was also a weapon. The dark belonged to predators. Wolves, cave lions, and hyenas stalked the edges of human settlements, their eyes glowing in the night. Fire pushed them back, a boundary they dared not cross. A ring of flames around a camp transformed the balance of power, giving fragile humans dominance in a world ruled by stronger beasts. Fire hardened spear tips, turning wood into sharper weapons. It cleared forests, drove animals into traps, and lit the path through caves and forests. It was both shield and sword, protector and destroyer. And yet, fire carried risks. A single ember could ignite dry grass, unleashing infernos beyond control. A child reaching too close could burn, leaving scars as a reminder of its danger. The balance between mastery and disaster was delicate, and humans learned to approach fire with respect. It was a friend, but also a reminder that survival often walked hand in hand with peril. Beyond survival, fire took on a deeper meaning. To sit before flames was to witness a living spirit, dancing, shifting, breathing in its own way. Many clans must have believed fire was alive, a gift from the gods or spirits, a spark of the sun carried into the night. Rituals often centered around it. Chants rising with the smoke, offerings tossed into flames, stories told as sparks drifted into the dark sky. Fire was a bridge between worlds, the material and the spiritual, the living and the dead. The flicker of flames also gave birth to imagination. Shadows leaping on cave walls became animals, figures, or spirits, inspiring stories told to children and remembered for generations. Fire's light turned darkness into theater, a stage upon which the first myths were performed. In this sense, fire was not only a tool of survival, but a catalyst for culture. Without it, perhaps the earliest art, storytelling, and rituals would never have taken shape. The symbolism of fire was always dual. It represented life, the warmth of survival, the joy of shared meals, the comfort of community. But it also represented destruction, the blaze that consumed forests, the danger that scarred skin, the reminder that power must be tempered with caution. This duality reflected the very nature of survival itself. Fragile yet strong, nurturing yet perilous. Technological mastery of fire grew over time. Early humans may have captured it from natural sources, lightning strikes, volcanic eruptions, or burning grasslands, before learning to create it at will. Sparks struck from flint against stone, embers coaxed from dry wood, or friction from spinning sticks became rituals of ingenuity. The ability to make fire anywhere, anytime, was a revolutionary leap, granting humans freedom to travel, settle, and survive in climates where no other species could endure. Fire also marked the boundary between human and animal. No other creature, however strong or cunning, had this gift. To tame fire was to step apart, to claim a unique identity as masters not only of the body but the environment itself. This sense of mastery must have filled humans with awe and pride, deepening the belief that they were chosen, different, or favored by the spirits of the earth. In family life, fire was a hearth, the central place where bonds were reinforced. Meals were shared around it, children were warmed by it, and stories were born beside it. Fire was the center of community, the core of human life both physically and emotionally. Without it, survival was fragmented and fragile. With it, humanity found a focus, a circle that held people together in safety and meaning. Imagine the scene. Snow falling outside, the wind howling through the trees. Inside a cave, a fire crackles, its glow reflecting on painted walls. A child sleeps against a mother's chest, warmed by the flames. A hunter sharpens a spear in a glow, while an elder speaks softly of spirits who guard the clan. The fire is not just heat or light. It is a thread binding them all, past to present, life to meaning. Thus, fire was more than survival. It was transformation. It turned food into nourishment, fear into courage, darkness into imagination. It became a symbol of resilience, a reminder that humanity could take the raw forces of the earth and shape them into something greater. It was not only flames that burned in the Ice Age, it was the human spirit itself, rising with the sparks, refusing to be extinguished. In the brutal winters of the Ice Age, survival was not only about fire and food, it was also about protection against the cold that wrapped itself around the body like a predator. Without clothing, human skin was far too fragile to withstand snowstorms, icy winds, and freezing nights. Unlike fur-covered animals, humans had no natural defense against winter, and so they turned to ingenuity. With bone tools, stone scrapers, and firelight as their allies, cavemen transformed animal hides, furs, and sinews into the first garments of survival. Clothing was not luxury. It was armor, a second skin that allowed humanity to step into the frozen world and endure what would otherwise have been impossible. The earliest clothing was simple yet effective. Fresh hides were stripped from animals, cleaned with stone scrapers, and softened with fat or brains to keep them pliable. These hides were then wrapped around the body, tied with strips of sinew, or fastened with bone pins. At first, they were crude coverings, draped cloaks, leggings, or hoods. But even in this form, they provided warmth and shielded the body from cutting winds. Over time, these coverings became more refined, shaped and stitched with bone needles into fitted garments. Such tailoring transformed raw skins into clothing that clung closely to the body, trapping precious heat while allowing freedom of movement for hunting, gathering, and daily tasks. Fur was the most prized material of all. The thick pelts of mammoths, bison, and wolves became coats, cloaks, and bedding, while softer furs like rabbit or fox lined hoods and mittens. Layering furs created insulation that mimicked the protection of the very animals they hunted. A hunter wrapped in such garments could walk into blizzards where bare skin would freeze in moments. Each pelt carried not only warmth but a story. The chase, the kill, the transformation from prey into protector. Clothing thus became both practical and symbolic, proof of victory over the cold and over the beasts of the Ice Age. But clothing was not only about warmth. It was also protection. Hides toughened with smoke or grease served as barriers against rain, snow, and icy ground. Boots made from softened leather, stuffed with grass or moss for insulation, protected feet from frostbite during long journeys. Gloves and hoods shielded the most vulnerable parts of the body, fingers, ears, and nose, from freezing. In this way, clothing became a shield against the environment, extending the body's endurance and allowing humans to move farther, hunt longer, and survive harsher conditions. Decoration, too, began to appear. Clothing was often adorned with beads, shells, or teeth, sewn into garments with sinew. These decorations may have served as charms, symbols of identity, or marks of status within the clan. Some may have carried spiritual meaning, amulets believed to protect the wearer in hunts or journeys. Others reflected artistry and pride, proof that even in survival, humans sought beauty and meaning. Clothing was not only functional. It was an expression of culture, a sign that survival was about more than endurance. It was about identity. The process of making clothing was a communal task. Women, children, and elders often played leading roles in preparing hides, stitching garments, and passing down the knowledge of techniques. Around the fire, hides were scraped and softened, threads twisted from sinew, and bone needles pushed carefully through fur. These were not small tasks, but labors of survival, each stitch a barrier against the deadly cold. In this way, clothing became another thread that tied the clan together, proof that survival was built not by individuals alone, but by the collective efforts of all. Contrast lay at the heart of this practice. Without clothing, a single night in deep winter could mean death. With it, a clan could move across frozen landscapes, hunt in snow, and endure storms. Clothing turned vulnerability into resilience, transforming humans from fragile creatures into beings capable of thriving in places where few others could. It was a quiet triumph of ingenuity over nature, a silent but profound declaration that humanity would not be broken by the cold. Clothing also carried ritual significance. Certain furs may have been reserved for ceremonies or leaders, while animal skins may have been worn during hunts as symbols of power or connection to the spirits of prey. To wear the pelt of a wolf, for example, might have been to invoke its cunning. To wear a bear's fur, its strength. In this way, clothing was more than material. It was meaning stitched into fabric, a living bond between humans and the creatures they depended on. As generations passed, techniques improved. Clothing became tailored to the environment. Lighter garments for warmer months, heavier layers for deep winter, waterproof hides for snow and rain. Each adjustment reflected humanity's growing mastery over its environment. No longer merely reacting to nature, humans learned to shape it, bend it, and use it to their advantage. Every cloak, every hood, every boot was a testament to that mastery. Picture the scene. A hunter steps out into the snow, his boots lined with moss, his cloak thick with layered furs, his hood drawn tight against the wind. Behind him, children huddle close in fur-lined shelters, wrapped in garments sewn by careful hands. The fire burns inside, but beyond its reach, clothing is the only shield. Every stitch, every scrap of fur, every knot of sinew becomes as vital as fire or food. Without it, the clan would freeze. With it, they endure. Thus, clothing and protection were not afterthoughts in Ice Age survival. They were central as fire and food, as symbolic as rituals and stories. In fur and hide, humans clothed not only their bodies but their determination, carrying warmth, safety, and identity into the heart of the cold. Each garment was a triumph, each stitch a victory, each cloak a silent promise. No matter how harsh the winter, humanity would survive. In the frozen world of the Ice Age, no element of survival was more immediate than shelter. Fire could warm the body, clothing could protect the skin, but without a shield against the howling winds, driving snow, and endless cold nights, life would not last long. For early humans, shelter was not just a convenience. It was a thin line between existence and extinction. The natural world, unforgiving and wild, offered caves, overhangs, and rocky alcoves, which became the first haven for survival. Yet, as human ingenuity deepened, so too did the ability to build, craft, and shape homes from the very bones of the land and the animals that roamed it. Shelter became not only protection but a canvas of innovation, proof of humanity's relentless will to endure. Caves were the earliest and most reliable refuge. Within their stone walls, families gathered around fires that flickered against ceilings blackened with smoke. The sound of wind was muffled outside, while the warmth of communal flames filled the hollow spaces. Caves offered stability. They did not collapse under storms, nor did they shift with the seasons. They provided natural insulation, keeping warmth in and the worst of the cold at bay. Yet, caves were not always available. They could be damp, crowded, or dangerous, often already home to predators like cave bears or lions. For this reason, humans could not depend on caves alone. They had to build their own shelters when nature offered none. The first constructed shelters were born of necessity and creativity. Mammoth bones, enormous and enduring, were arranged into frames that curved like domes, forming the skeletons of homes. Skins and hides were stretched over these frames, layered for insulation, and secured with sinew or stone weights. The result was a dwelling that trapped heat, resisted wind, and could withstand the season's storms. Archaeological evidence shows entire villages built from mammoth bone huts, each home glowing with firelight, each one a testimony to skill and determination. In these bone shelters, humans transformed death into life, using the remains of giants not only for tools and clothing, but for the very walls that protected them. Other materials were used too. Branches, reeds, and stones were woven together into simple huts, sometimes reinforced with mud, snow, or animal hides. In snowy regions, humans learned to pile snow into domes, early versions of igloos, that trapped warm surprisingly well, as snow's insulation kept the interior far warmer than the air outside. Grass and moss served as roofing, while fur-lined interiors created comfort within. These were not crude makeshift shelters, but carefully crafted homes that reflected a growing knowledge of materials and their properties. To survive, humans did not simply take what nature gave. They reimagined it, reshaped it, and built something new. Inside these shelters, life unfolded in rhythms of survival and community. Fires were built at the center, smoke escaping through small gaps or holes, warming everyone who gathered near. Around the edges, furs and hides formed bedding, soft and insulating against the frozen ground. Tools were stored carefully, meat was dried or smoked near the flames, and stories were told in the flickering glow of firelight. The home was not merely protection. It was a heart of culture, where survival transformed into shared experience and hardship became a bond between people. Innovation in shelter was also deeply tied to migration. As humans moved across vast, icy plains and unfamiliar territories, they needed shelters that could be built quickly, taken down, and carried. Portable structures like hide-covered frames served nomadic groups who followed herds of mammoths, bison, or reindeer. In this way, shelter became mobile, adapting to the changing needs of a people who could not remain in one place. These portable homes were the ancestors of tents, their simplicity hiding the genius of their design. Light enough to move, strong enough to endure, warm enough to save lives. Beyond mere practicality, shelter carried symbolic meaning. The entrance to the cave, the frame of a bone hut, the layering of hides. These were thresholds, dividing the chaos of the wild from the safety of the human world. To step inside was to leave behind the teeth of predators, the bite of wind, and the claws of snowstorms. A shelter was a sanctuary where the human spirit could rest, heal, and dream. Even as survival demanded unending labor, shelter gave space for reflection and connection. It was here that art began. Cave paintings on walls, carvings in bone, the first expressions of imagination born from safety and firelight. The act of building shelters was also communal. No single person could raise a mammoth bone hut or stretch the hides of a giant creature across its frame alone. These tasks required many hands, coordinated effort, and shared knowledge. Shelter building reinforced the bonds of clan, each member contributing strength, skill, or wisdom. Children carried branches, elders passed down techniques. Hunters provided the hides and bones. Together they transformed raw materials into homes. And in doing so, they built not only walls but community itself. Contrast was ever present in these shelters. Outside lay a world of endless cold, wind that could strip flesh from bone, and nights so long that time seemed to freeze. Inside lay warmth, safety, and a fragile but vital sense of control. The walls of bone or stone were more than barriers. They were the difference between despair and endurance. Within them, the clan could cook food, mend clothing, prepare weapons, and tell stories. Without them, they would perish. Thus, every shelter was not only a structure but triumph, each one standing as proof that humans refused to be broken by the elements. In the deeper sense, shelters reflected humanity's growing mastery of its environment. Animals survived by instinct, following patterns set by nature. Humans survived by creation, by imagining solutions, building them, and improving them over time. Caves, huts, and bone houses were not simply shelters. They were decorations. They declared that humans would not merely endure but adapt, invent, and ultimately thrive. The home became the first architecture, the foundation of villages, and the seed of civilization itself. Picture the scene. Snow falls heavily across a barren plain, winds tearing across the land. In the distance, smoke curls upward from a cluster of shelters, each one glowing with firelight. Inside, families huddle close, their breath rising into the air, their bodies warmed by both flame and the company of others. The walls creak under the weight of the storm, but they hold firm, built with care, with strength, with hope. Here, in these fragile yet enduring homes, humanity survives. Thus, shelter and innovation stood as one of the most vital pillars of Ice Age survival. From caves to huts, from bones to hides, from the natural to built, each home carried within it the ingenuity of a people who refused to surrender. Shelter was not only protection from the cold. It was a space of unity, invention, and meaning. It was the heart of human life, a testament carved into stone, bone, and memory, declaring that even in the harshest winter, humanity would endure. In the story of human survival, few forces stand as powerfully as fire. For prehistoric people, fire was not only a source of warmth, but a miracle that separated them from every other creature on the frozen plains. In the depths of the Ice Age, where winter could last for months and nights stretched endlessly, fire became more than a tool. It became a guardian, a teacher, and a symbol of power. Its flames flickered against cave walls and bone shelters, driving away shadows and predators, offering light where none existed. Fire was both fragile and eternal. Fragile in that it could be extinguished by wind or rain, eternal in its ability to be passed from one heart to another, linking generations to the same glowing flame. The role of fire began with survival. Its warmth was life itself. A body exposed to the icy winds could collapse within hours. But with fire, the cold was held at bay. Families huddled around flames, feeling the sting of winter soften into comfort. Fires turned caves from lifeless hollows into living spaces, shelters from mere structures in the homes. The psychological comfort of fire was as important as its physical warmth. To sit before it was to feel protected. To hear the crackle was to know safety. Without it, the night was long, dark, and filled with unseen dangers. With it, humans held a piece of sun in their hands. But fire did more than warm bodies. It changed the way people ate and, with it, the way they lived. Raw meat was difficult to chew and sometimes dangerous, carrying sickness or parasites. Fire transformed it, softening fibers, releasing flavors, and destroying harmful elements. Cooking food also made it easier to digest, granting humans more energy from the same meals. This change was revolutionary. It gave hunters and gatherers the strength to endure harsh conditions and made survival in frozen climates more sustainable. The fire pit was not only a hearth, it was the first kitchen, the birthplace of cuisine, and the foundation of nourishment that allowed humans to thrive. Fire also gave protection. In the Ice Age, the world was alive with predators, lions, hyenas, wolves, and bears. These creatures feared flames, keeping their distance when sparks leapt into the night sky. For a family gathered around a fire, the circle of light was a shield against the teeth and claws waiting beyond. Torches carried into the darkness lit hunting paths, guarded sleeping groups, and gave humans the courage to explore where otherwise they would not dare. Fire meant dominion over the night. For the first time in history, humans were not at the mercy of darkness. They were its conquerors. Beyond survival, fire became the heart of community. It drew people together, its light and warmth forming the center of social life. Around the flames, stories were told. Tales of hunts, warnings of dangers, myths of creation. Shadows danced across cave walls as voices rose and fell, creating the first oral traditions. Children learned from their elders by firelight. Hunters planned their next pursuit, and rituals were carried out in the glow. Fire was more than a tool. It was a stage, a gathering place, a sacred center. It gave humans not only heat and safety, but belonging. Fire also sparked innovation. With flames, humans learned to harden wooden spear tips, making them stronger and deadlier. They discovered how to use heat to crack stones in ways that produced sharper tools. Later, fire opened the path to pottery, allowing clay to be hardened into vessels for carrying and storing food. In this way, fire expanded human creativity, turning necessity into opportunity. The same element that warmed their bodies and cooked their meals also ignited their imagination, shaping the first steps toward technology and progress. In spiritual life, fire held profound symbolism. To control fire was to command a force that seemed divine. Lightning could strike, igniting forests, but to keep flames alive, to nurture them, and to pass them from hand to hand. This felt like holding power from the gods themselves. Flames became part of rituals, a bridge between the human world and the unseen. Some groups may believe that fire contained spirits, that it carried prayers upward in smoke, that its light could reach ancestors. In this way, fire was both practical and sacred, straddling the line between survival and meaning. The maintenance of fire was itself a task of survival. Sparks were not easily made. Flint struck against stone, or embers carried carefully in bundles of dried grass were the fragile beginnings of flame. Once a fire was lit, it was precious, and families worked to keep it alive, feeding it through nights and carry it across journeys. To lose fire was to lose protection, food, and hope. To maintain it was to ensure continuity. In this delicate balance, humans developed discipline, care, and foresight. Fire demanded responsibility, and through it, humans learned patience and planning, skills that extended far beyond the hearth. Contrast defined fire's role. It was a force of creation and destruction, of safety and danger. As humans battled against the merciless winters of the Ice Age, survival was not only a physical act, but also a deeply spiritual one. The endless cold, the howling winds, and the ever-present threat of hunger and predators demanded not just strength of body, but resilience of spirit. In this world of uncertainty, rituals, art, and belief systems became essential tools of survival. They gave meaning to suffering, order to chaos, and hope to a people who lived daily at the edge of extinction. For early humans, life and death were constant companions. And the rituals they performed, the art they created, and the symbols they believed in helped them endure a world that could easily overwhelm them. Rituals often revolved around the hunt, for the hunt was the heart of life. To secure food in winter was no small task, and the success of a hunt could determine the fate of an entire clan. Before setting out, hunters might perform ceremonies to honor the spirits of the animals they sought, asking forgiveness for taking life and protection for their journey. These rituals could involve chants, dances, or markings painted on bodies with ochre. After the hunt, ceremonies gave thanks, with bones arranged carefully or meat shared in ways that bound the community together. Such practices turned the act of killing into something sacred, balancing necessity with reverence. In their eyes, the hunt was not just a battle of predator and prey, but a spiritual exchange between humans and the natural world. Death, too, demanded ritual. In a time when lives were often cut short by cold, disease, or accidents, burial practices became central expressions of care and belief. Archaeological discoveries show Ice Age burials marked by offerings, tools, ornaments, and sometimes even food placed alongside the deceased. These gestures suggest a belief in an existence beyond the physical, a conviction that the dead would need companionship or supplies on their journey. Graves became sacred places, both honoring the lost and binding the living together in shared remembrance. In death, as in life, rituals gave shape to the otherwise incomprehensible cycle of existence. Art played an equally profound role. Within the safety of caves, far from the brutal cold outside, humans painted their world onto stone walls. Mammoths, bison, reindeer, and horses leapt across surfaces in ochre, charcoal, and clay. These images were not merely decorations, but acts of connection. To paint an animal was to bring it closer, to understand it, perhaps even to influence the hunt. Some images may have carried magical or spiritual significance, believed to call forth success or honor the creatures that sustained them. Others may have been stories, records of great hunts, warnings of dangers, or celebrations of triumphs. The act of creating art was itself a form of survival. It lifted people beyond the daily struggle, reminding them that life was more than hunger and cold. The flicker of firelight across painted walls turned caves into sacred spaces, where imagination and reality intertwined. Handprints pressed against stone symbolized presence. I was here, I endured, I left a mark. These early expressions of self and story were the roots of culture, binding generations not only through shared struggle, but through shared meaning. Spiritual beliefs extended beyond animals and ancestors to the elements themselves. Fire, water, stone, and sky held power, and rituals often sought harmony with these forces. The rising sun could be honored as a return of warmth. The moon and stars might guide migration or mark the passage of time. Storms and snow were feared but also respected, their ferocity viewed as expressions of unseen powers. In this way, spirituality was woven directly into the rhythms of nature. It was not separate from survival, but an extension of it, an attempt to live in balance with forces too great to control. Symbols carved into bone or etched into stone hint an evolving language of the sacred. Spirals, lines, and geometric patterns may have carried meanings now lost to us, signs of fertility, protection, or cycles of life. Portable objects, such as figurines carved from ivory or stone, suggest that belief traveled with people, shaping their journeys and providing comfort in unfamiliar lands. The famous Venus figurines, with their exaggerated features, may have represented fertility, abundance, or the continuity of life in a world where death was always near. Such objects were not luxuries but necessities, embodying hope in tangible form. Rituals and art also built community. Shared ceremonies bound clans together, reinforcing cooperation in the face of hardship. A hunt, a burial, or a festival was not only practical but unifying, reminding each member that they were part of something larger than themselves. The cold outside divided and threatened, but inside, by firelight and ritual, humans found togetherness. The bonds forged through shared belief were as strong as any physical tool, enabling groups to endure challenges that no individual could survive alone. The contrast between survival's harsh realities and the beauty of ritual and art is striking. Outside the shelter, snow buried the earth, predators prowled, and the struggle for food was relentless. Inside, painted walls glowed, stories echoed, and dances honored life and spirit. These rituals did not change the cold, but they changed how humans faced it. They turned fear into courage, loss into remembrance, and survival into meaning. Without them, existence might have been unbearable. With them, life, though harsh, was filled with purpose. Imagine the scene. Deep within a cave, the air is thick with the scent of smoke and the warmth of fire. Shadows dance as figures move in rhythm, chanting in low tones, their voices echoing off the stone. On the walls, animals leap in eternal motion, drawn by hands that sought to capture their spirit. A child presses a red handprint beside them, marking their place in the flow of time. Outside, the wind howls and snow falls endlessly. But here, in this sacred space, humanity finds not just shelter but transcendence. Ultimately, rituals, art, and belief were not separate from survival, but woven into its very fabric. They gave meaning to hunger, death, and cold, transforming them into experiences that could be endured and understood. They united people, carried traditions, and sparked creativity. In the Ice Age, to survive was to fight against the elements, but to live was to create, to believe, and to imagine. These acts of spirit were as vital as fire, shelter, and food, for they kept the human heart alive when the world outside seemed determined to extinguish it.